Hey guys, this is Jason. I am making another classic movie review. This time around, it's gonna be for Drive, directed by Nicolas Refn, and it stars Ryan Gosling, Carey, Mulligan, Bryan Cranston, Ron Perlman, Oscar Isaac, and Albert Brooks. And it is about Gosling as a stunt driver by day, but is also a getaway driver by night, and helps a bunch of criminals drive them to wherever they need to go so they can break into places, but he doesn't carry a gun or another weapon around him. All he does is just drive wherever the criminals need to go to get away from the police. Then one day, he starts to date his next door neighbor named Irene, played by Mulligan, but then some weird and crazy things start to happen around him, making this whole world go upside down. And that's all I'm gonna say about the plot, in case you haven't already read the plot synopsis or watched any of the trailers for this film, which if you haven't, then don't, because they completely give away a lot of big spoilers that happen in the film, which that is not what I'm gonna do for this video. This is not gonna have any big spoiler or a big mention I'm gonna say about the film. This is gonna be a spoiler-free review. When this film first came out in 2011, critics and audiences were divided on the film, where critics loved it and called it a masterpiece, but audience members thought it was very boring and not a lot happened, and they didn't understand the love that it got, because most of the trailers for this film made it look like it's a big non-stop action film when it's really not when you watch the film yourself. Because in reality, this movie is just a simple drama about a guy trying to have a normal life and get himself out of the crime world. I did not see Drive when it was in theaters because I had no idea what the movie was until a few years later. I didn't watch any trailers for the film. It wasn't until around when I was 17 when I was deciding to watch more R-rated films that I wasn't allowed to watch as a kid, but I was reaching a time where I felt comfortable watching some more adult stuff at that time. And Drive was one of the first R-rated films I watched at that time. It was on TV at one point, and it blew me away when I watched it. It really surprised me. Now granted, it was censored when I was watching it, but it was still really intense. It's one of those films where it does the show don't tell type of stuff, like the kind you have to pay attention to each detail this movie is showing you. Like when Gosling's character is trying to think of a certain thing that he has to do in a bad situation, which his character's a very quiet person. He doesn't like to talk very much. So you just see him do some things that are supposed to be important to the story and get you to understand what he's thinking in his mind just from his movements and what type of things that he can do in the film. Like in an earlier scene when we see him get ready for his stunt for a movie that he's a part of, and you see how well he's able to handle it without even hesitating. And we also see him in an earlier scene where he's trying to get these two guys away from these police officers, and he's keeping himself calm. He's not freaking out in the middle of this type of situation, making his character feel like a mystery for other people around him and us as the audience, getting us to think, who is this guy? What is his backstory? Because we only learn about 3 things about this guy. He's both a stunt driver, a getaway driver, and he has a crush on this girl who's also his neighbor, and that's it. Now, most people might not like how silent he is all the time, because most characters wouldn't feel comfortable around him, because in most of the film he only says a few lines and he just stares blankly a lot at other people around him. But I'm not saying that as a bad thing, because it works for his character, making him feel more like a mystery, getting the audience to wonder who he is and why he acts that way. And Ryan Gosling is really good as a driver. He's stoic when he's supposed to be, and he still shows some emotion whenever he's supposed to have it. And I'm calling him the driver because he's called out on IMDb and in the credits, so we never really know what his real name is. And after this film, this role has kind of been a staple for Gosling's career, because he played this similar character in other films like Blade Runner 2049 and Only God Forgives. And we still get some emotion from the driver in this film, because after a big moment happens, we see him at a diner and someone is trying to talk to him, and the driver says one of the most brutal and ruthless things you could possibly hear from a character like this guy, showing you how he's tense feeling after a big moment happens. This movie also has some visual imagery that you gotta look out for, like with the scorpion on Gosling's jacket, which is something that you also gotta do some research for, because those visual images are supposed to get you to pay attention and understand what they're going for, like what the scorpion is supposed to mean and what certain lighting in the nighttime scenes are supposed to mean. Which also brings me to the cinematography. Not only is this a very well shot movie, but it also helps with some of the visual imagery as well, with the nighttime scenes having a bunch of neon lights around the driver and giving us some very iconic shots. The cinematography definitely makes this film really good to watch. Even if you don't like the film very much, if you've seen the movie already, we can at least say that it is still cool to look at. That's at least the one thing in this film we can agree on, whether you like the film or not. Now, despite the fact that this film doesn't have a lot of action, it still has some pretty intense moments. Like, look out for one scene with Gosling and Mulligan in an elevator. That's all I'll say there. And it's not squeaky clean. It does not play it safe with some of the violence, which is another issue that people had with this film when this film came out, because they thought the violence in this film was very unnecessary and pointless and was way too brutal. And while I do understand that complaint, but I honestly don't agree with it at all, because the violence in this film does have a point in the film. No spoilers, of course, but it relates to the driver and what he's going through and what frustrates him, and you get to see how he reacts whenever he gets angry or like trying to let his frustration out. And it makes sense for the story and the character, making this feel like it has a point for the film and what he uses to defend himself in a certain moment, which leads to some pretty brutal results. I mean, if you have seen the film, then you already know what I'm talking about. But it also has some big name actors like Bryan Cranston, who is great in this film. Ron Perlman is also awesome in this film, and Albert Brooks is fantastic as well. Even Oscar Isaac is in this film in one of his earlier roles before he became a big star. Another thing that does have a purpose for the story are some of the song choices. It's not a musical, don't worry. It just has some song choices that you would hear in the film that do have a reason for being there. Like, there's this one song called A Real Hero by College and the Electric Youth. That one has a purpose for the story, and it is the main theme for this film. And it's also a great listen. I do recommend listening to that song if you haven't yet. Now, Nicolas Refn, the director of this film, is known for making a lot of films, and his films are kind of a mixed bag for me. Obviously, Drive is my favorite of his, and he's also made a pretty good movie called Bronson with Tom Hardy, but he's also made some films that are more style over substance, with movies like Valhalla Rising, The Neon Demon, and Only God Forgives, which also stars Gosling, because those films not only have characters that barely speak, but they have a lot of violence that can bother a lot of audience members and can go way too far. Like, in particular in Only God Forgives, there's this one scene in the film involving a chair and a bunch of knives. Like, that's all I'm gonna say there. And he likes to have that kind of violence in his films because, he has a fetish for that violence. I'm being serious, and he has admitted that in the past. And I'm not gonna downgrade Drive for having that much violence, because trust me, those other films I just mentioned are far worse than Drive in regards to the violence. And also because the violence in this film does have a purpose for the story, and it worked. I do recommend watching Drive if you haven't yet. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, and it's nothing like anything you've seen before if you haven't seen it yet. Now, I do understand that Drive is not gonna be for everyone. Not everyone is gonna enjoy this film because of how different it is. It's one of those films you gotta watch at least once just to see how you feel about the film, and if you love the film, I'm glad you enjoyed it, and if you didn't, then that's okay. We all have our own opinions. Drive is one of my favorite movies of all time, and I am going to give it an A+. Guys, those are my thoughts on Drive, and I hope you did enjoy this video, and I hope it does get you interested in watching Drive if you haven't seen it yet. But if you guys have seen Drive, what did you think about it? Did you think it's an amazing film, or do you think this film is not all that good? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss a thing, because it helps my channel grow. Hit the notification bell so you know what other videos I'm posting. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.